Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown.
I should do the opening someday and freak everyone out.
Well, sure.
If they're what? What's going on? What's going on?
What happened to Mike? He croaked.
He got hit by a car while going on one of his many walks.
Yeah, or he's been stricken mute. So it's going to be a very, very short podcast.
So you'll try to read the script and it'll be silence and I'll just cut in and say things and that will be the show.
And then we'll have the whole episode done with a Stephen Hawking's-esque voice generator.
Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown. With me as usual is my good friend Matthew.
Oh boy.
Too funny. Well, shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
In the quiet city of Jonquière, Quebec, the brutal 2000 murder of 19-year-old Guylaine Potvin sent shockwaves through her community and left investigators baffled for over 2 decades. For years, the case grew cold, with few leads and little hope for justice. But in 2022, a remarkable breakthrough in forensic science and persistent detective work finally led to the arrest of Marc-André Grenon, a man whose name had lingered on the periphery of the investigation for years. This episode takes you inside the investigation, the science that cracked the case, and the long-awaited trial that brought answers to a grieving family. This is Dark Poutine episode 369, Final Justice, the murder of Gilain Potvin. For thousands of years, the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, where Jonquière is located, has been a vital meeting and hunting ground for the Innu people. The area's abundant game, fish, and berries made it a crucial site for nomadic life, and the reserve there remains a living testament to this deep indigenous heritage. The Innu, skilled trappers and traders, adapted to the arrival of European fur trading posts in the 18th century, but faced ongoing pressures as the land was gradually claimed for settlement, resource extraction, and industrial development. Over the centuries, the Innu community lost much of its traditional territory to logging, railways, and hydroelectric projects, but has continued to assert its presence and culture in the region. European settlement of Jonquière began in the mid-19th century with the founding of an agricultural parish in 1847. The arrival of the railway in 1893 triggered rapid industrial growth, transforming Jonquière and its neighboring communities into a powerhouse of pulp and paper production by the early 20th century. The construction of the world's largest aluminum plant in nearby Arvida between 1925 and 1928 and the development of massive hydroelectric projects cemented the region's reputation as an industrial hub. By the 1970s, Jonquière had amalgamated with Arvida and Kenogami, becoming a central district in what would later be known as Saguenay. By the year 2000, Jonquière was a city shaped by its industrial roots and multicultural history with a strong sense of community and resilience. Yet beneath the surface, it was not immune to tragedy. It was here, in a quiet residential neighborhood, that the life of Guylaine Potvin was brutally cut short. A crime that would haunt the city for decades and set the stage for one of Quebec's most remarkable cold case investigations.
Yeah, and this is a fascinating one. And I think what's often missing from stories like this is how quickly a case becomes cold. Sometimes not because nothing's happening, but because what's needed simply doesn't exist yet. And then we're going to see that here, right? And, we often imagine inaction with cold cases, but in reality, cold cases are often frozen by technological gaps, not apathy.
And we're seeing that right now. As of this recording, police in Nova Scotia are still looking for Lily and Jack Sullivan, a 6-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy who went missing from their property on May 2nd. And what we're seeing online is really disturbing to me. We're seeing a lot of sort of things being filled in, people filling in the gaps with assumption and speculation and those kind of things. And I'm not super happy about that. What I'm seeing, especially, attacks made against parents and other people who may or may not have anything to do with this.
Armchair investigators.
Right.
Assuming makes an ass out of you and me.
It certainly does. But people are prone to it. When there is a gap in information, people will fill it with assumption, oftentimes.
When it's kids, people ratchet that up even more.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just hope the little ones, I don't know, I hope they're safe. And if not, I hope there's some understanding of what's happened or some justice.
Yeah, me too. On the morning of April 28, 2000, Gilain Potvin, a 19-year-old junior college student at Cégep de Jonquière, was found dead in her basement apartment at 3897 Rue Panay. The discovery was made by her close friend and classmate, Audrey Saint-Pierre, who had spent the previous evening with Gilain preparing for a school project. As Saint-Pierre later recounted, the two had ended their night early to be ready for a big presentation the next day, with Gilain's parting words being, "Be careful, it's dark." When Gilain failed to answer her phone the next morning, a behavior described as highly unusual by those who knew her, Audrey Saint-Pierre's concern grew. She walked to her friend's apartment, where she found Gilain lying face up on the bed, her face and lips blue, a sight that would remain seared in her memory.
Yeah, this discovery wasn't made by law enforcement or a landlord.
It was just a
by
buddy.
a friend, right? And I think that proximity adds a layer of emotional consequence we rarely think about or talk about, right? Mm-hmm. We often think of trauma as sort of secondhand or delayed, but for Audrey, it began the moment she stepped into that room.
Yeah.
I feel for her.
Yeah, it's terrible. The crime scene that greeted investigators was both intimate and deeply unsettling. Crime scene photos later presented at trial offered a poignant glimpse into Gilain's life. A large white teddy bear with a bow tie on the floor, a school bag on the living room couch, a computer and radio in her room, and movie posters on the walls. Among the evidence was a letter Gilain had written to her roommate, encouraging her to, quote, "take care of herself, disconnect a lot, please. We're getting there and we'll stay alive." Signed, Gilain with 3 X's. These small details painted a picture of a conscientious student, a teenager who loved to talk and watch wedding TV shows and was affectionately known as Mama Gilain for her protective nature toward her friends. The details of the crime scene quickly made it clear to police that this was a targeted and violent assault. The signs of struggle were confined to the bedroom, suggesting Gilain was attacked while she slept. The bed had been moved, with sheets and pillows scattered on the floor. Quote, "Things were shaken up in that room," said retired crime scene technician André Lecomte. Forensic teams collected biological evidence from several locations, including under Guylaine's fingernails, on a t-shirt she was wearing, and on a box of condoms found in the room. The autopsy would later show that she died of strangulation with injuries including blunt trauma to her head and shoulder, a bite mark on her breast, and evidence of sexual assault. Dr. Carolyn Tonge, a pathologist, said that Guylaine suffered, quote, asphyxia from compression, seemingly a combination of manual strangulation and ligature strangulation. The presence of a belt with a broken buckle next to her body suggested it may have been used to inflict some of the injuries to her neck.
Here's where limits of early forensic work are clear, right?
Yeah.
Not because the science was flawed, but because time distorts evidence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, dental records, DNA integrity, even fingerprint viability can degrade and shift. And I think cases like this remind us that the clock isn't neutral. It's a factor that actually erodes clarity.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how this is figured out.
Mm-hmm. Guylaine was found wearing only a t-shirt with an imprint on her right hand that suggested a ring had recently been removed. The violence of the attack was evident not only in the physical injuries but in the disarray of her personal space. Her sanctuary had been violated in the most profound way. Although DNA was found in multiple locations in the bedroom and on her body, at the time the technology was not advanced enough to identify a suspect. Partial fingerprints at the scene could not be linked to anyone, and the bite mark found on her breast could not be matched to any suspect due to dental changes over time. The initial investigation was painstaking. However, the DNA found at the scene did not match any profiles in the police database, and there were no witnesses to the crime. The lack of immediate leads meant that despite the investigators' best efforts, the case grew cold. The impact on Jonquière was immediate and profound. Guylaine's family and friends were devastated, and the wider community was shaken to its core. The sense of safety that had defined the town was replaced by anxiety and a desperate longing for justice, a longing that would persist for more than 20 years. Guylaine's friends and family clung to hope, but as the years passed, the memory of her life and the horror of her final moments cast a long shadow over the community. The case remained a painful reminder of the violence that had shattered their sense of security. In those early days, all that remained were unanswered questions and the grief of a community. Gilain Potvin was remembered as a conscientious student, a caring friend, and a beloved daughter whose life was cut short in a senseless act of violence. The investigation, although thorough, was The years that followed were marked by frustration and sorrow. Guylaine's family and friends continued to mourn her loss while police held on to the hope that advances in forensic science might one day bring the perpetrator to justice. The community of Jonquière, once defined by its sense of safety and close-knit bonds, was left to grapple with the reality that such violence could strike so close to home.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's worth noticing is how community memory functions differently from institutional memory. Mm-hmm. Institutions change staff, reorganize, reprioritize. Right. But communities, families, friends, local journalists keep the thread intact.
Yeah, some are consistent throughout the entire investigation, yeah.
And without local pressure, many cases maybe would not resurface at all.
Mm-hmm. As the case languished in the cold case files, the city changed and grew. But the wound left by Guylaine's murder never fully healed. Her story remained a powerful reminder both of the fragility of life and the resilience of those left behind. There had been a person of interest very early on. Marc-André Grenon, who had lived in a building directly behind Guylaine's apartment in 1995, was flagged as a person of interest in 2001 due to his violent history and familiarity with the area. However, without a DNA sample to compare, police could not advance the case. Retired officer Bruno Cormier later testified that Grenon had twice refused to provide voluntary DNA samples during the early investigations, leaving authorities powerless to confirm their suspicions. In the early 2000s, DNA technology was still in its infancy compared to today's standards, and this had a direct impact upon the Guylaine Potvin investigation. Although investigators had DNA evidence from the scene, the scientific tools available at the time had significant limitations. DNA testing then required larger, high-quality samples. If the DNA was mixed with someone else's or was degraded, as is often the case in violent crimes, the results were often unclear or inconclusive. As one expert later explained, quote, "The analysis required a sufficient and good quality DNA sample," end quote, and back then, that was often hard to get from crime scenes like this one.
Yeah, this is a good reminder that early DNA tech wasn't magic. It had thresholds, right? Small, mixed, or degraded samples often returned ambiguous results. And, what we now consider standard forensic practice was back then still inching forward. Reliability towards reliability, but it was inching forward. Yeah.
Another major obstacle at the time was the DNA database itself. In 2000, Canada's database was much smaller than it is today, so even if police managed to develop a DNA profile, the odds of finding a match were slim. At the time, the database contained fewer than 10,000 entries compared to the over 16 million entries it contains today.
Yeah, and the stats that you're giving say a lot, right? DNA databases don't just grow, they become exponentially more useful the larger they get. And it's kind of like the network effect. Each new entry enhances the resolution of the entire system. So what was once a useless sample becomes decisive 20 years later, right? Not because it changed, but because the system did.
Right. And I mean, you see that in consumer level DNA databases as well, like 23andMe, Ancestry.com or CA, wherever you are. They, depending on the size of the database that they have, your results may differ. Like I've seen my 23andMe results differ slightly at Ancestry, which is really fascinating. But anyway, so yeah, you're 100% correct. After the investigation had long since stalled, the Sûreté de Québec's cold case squad was expanded in 2018, growing from 5 officers to nearly 30 to tackle hundreds of unsolved murders dating back to the 1960s. Guylaine's case became a symbol of the squad's mission and the enduring hope for answers. In a statement, provincial police praised the work of investigators in the Cold Case Division and the Forensic Science Laboratory, highlighting, quote, "the innovative methods used today in forensic biology," end quote, that would eventually allow for a breakthrough. For over 2 decades, Guylaine Potvin's murder remained one of Quebec's most haunting unsolved crimes. Despite the DNA evidence collected from under her fingernails, on a condom box, her t-shirt, and a belt at the scene, investigators had hit a wall. The Patron project, a breakthrough tool launched in 2022 by Quebec's Laboratoire des Sciences Judiciaires et la Médecine Légale, LSGML, played a pivotal role in reopening the Guylaine Potvin cold case. Developed and validated by forensic biologist Valérie Clermont-Baudouin and her team, Patron utilizes advanced Y chromosome analysis to assist investigators when traditional DNA searches reach a dead end.
Yeah, and this patronym, right? Patronym?
Patron, yes.
Yeah, but you can see the pun, patronymy?
Patronymy, yes, exactly.
It's a fascinating example of second-order inference, right? So using this known genetic pattern, the Y chromosome, not to identify the person directly, but to predict a probable surname. This is a really cool leap in sort of from evidence to hypothesis, isn't it? And it's kind of a different investigative logic. I mean, this whole thing, this episode, for me, like the science behind it, like I don't want to lose the fact of the victim, and
that there was somebody lost,
and the guy, just if you look at these pictures again, it's like gross, right? Asshole. And sorry, I shouldn't swear on the show, but
too late.
The science, the science behind this is just fascinating.
I agree. The science is really fascinating, but we don't want to lose the fact that Guylaine was taken.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how Patron works. When police recover male DNA from a crime scene but can't find a match in the National DNA Database, Patron steps in. The project compares the Y chromosome profile from the crime scene to a unique database called PYST, which contains thousands of Y DNA profiles linked to surnames. These profiles are sourced from volunteers who submitted their DNA to genealogy companies, and the database is updated annually. As Clermont Baudouin later explained in court, quote, "The purpose of the Patron YME project is to provide family names as investigative leads when the case is stalled. It's possible to do this search if a male DNA profile is found at a crime scene," end quote. The Y chromosome is passed down from father to son, just like a surname in many cultures. This means that all men from the same paternal line will share the same Y chromosome profile and often the same last name. The project doesn't identify a specific person, but it can provide police with a strong lead on a possible surname associated with the DNA found at the scene. Clermont Baudouin later testified that the project's current success rate is approximately 57%, but it is expected to improve as more surnames are added to the database. I think I'll add mine. Why not? She emphasized, quote, "The search for surnames does not allow for the identification or exclusion of a particular suspect. To do that, you still need to compare a direct DNA sample from the individual," end quote. The DNA collected from under Guylaine's fingernails was analyzed in 2022 using a method similar to Patron YME. The results were striking. The surname Grenon came up as a top priority match with a score of 94 out of 98, well above the threshold for a high confidence lead. This breakthrough allowed investigators to refocus on Marc-André Grenon.
Yeah, so that number, 94 out of 98, isn't definitive in itself, but it's enough evidence to reprioritize attention, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it reaffirms an earlier suspicion.
Right.
You know, and good investigation is rarely linear. You know, we've seen this so many times that investigation loops back, right? Relooks, right? Science doesn't tell you what's true; it just tells you to look harder.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're about to see some stuff happening in the Trina Hunt case from Port Moody, the woman who I worked with who went missing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Her husband Ian has been arrested, and there's a pending court hearing, and it's about indignity to human remains. So that's the first thing they typically will charge somebody with, leading to eventually a charge of murder.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is the thing. He was initially a suspect. Then, you know, they had to go away from him as a suspect because they didn't have evidence. But now something has come up that we are unaware of at this point, and he is now a suspect, at least in indignity to human remains. So yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. I'm not sure if it's totally related to what we're talking about, but it's on my mind. And maybe it is DNA evidence or something else that is really concrete that, you know, points to Ian. Anyway, back to this case. Marc-André Grenon had long been on the list of persons of interest in the Guylaine Potvin murder, but his DNA wasn't in the database. The investigators needed to rule Grenon in or out. Not only was the surname identified as matching his, as we mentioned, he had lived on a property with a shared backyard with Guylaine's apartment years before her murder. But other red flags also kept him on investigators' radar. Grenon's criminal history and personal profile further fueled the suspicions. He was described as volatile, manipulative, and violent, with a record that included physical and psychological abuse in his intimate relationships. Just 3 days before Potvin's murder, Grenon was arrested for theft in Chicoutimi, giving a homeless shelter as his address at the time. In July 2000, he moved to Quebec City, where he would later commit another violent assault and attempted murder against a young woman, further establishing a pattern of predatory behavior. Police and prosecutors would later note that Grenon's transient lifestyle and violent tendencies made him a plausible suspect in unsolved cases across multiple regions of Quebec.
I think what's troubling here isn't his history, but how easily someone like him with that kind of record could drift through jurisdictions without consequences.
Well, that's what Clifford Olson did.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of a structural blind spot in policing when it comes to mobility, right?
Mm-hmm.
patterns don't always get noticed until a database or story pulls them all together.
Well, now we do have a database that works for that particular thing, and it seems to work very quickly.
Yeah, it didn't back then.
Right.
Or it was just starting to, probably, in those years, yeah.
As Grenon had twice before refused to provide a DNA sample to police voluntarily, investigators would have to get creative. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts so far?
I think there's something really sobering about the arc of this case, not just in terms of what was done, but in how long it took to name it and prove it and to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it kind of reminds me in a weird way of last week's episode, where you realize how vulnerable we all are to systems working as they're meant to work.
Right.
You know, and so you can see that connection I made. So you also see how fragile the systems can be. So, you know, I can't help but think of her family and how it must have felt to wait more than 2 decades for something that probably felt obvious to them from the beginning, but couldn't be proven until the machinery of science and the resolve of these investigators sort of caught up with it.
Right.
You know, and it's not just a story of violent crime. It's a story about what time does to truth, because sometimes it distorts it, but sometimes if enough people care enough and keep asking the same questions, it'll deliver.
Yeah. Knowing Marc-André Grenon would not cooperate voluntarily, police orchestrated a careful surveillance operation. According to testimony and court documents, detectives tracked Grenon to his residence in Granby and discreetly followed him as he went about his daily routine. On August 2nd, 2022, the opportunity finally presented itself. Grenon and a companion decided to attend a movie at a nearby cinema in Granby. Undercover officers purchased tickets and positioned themselves nearby, patiently observing Grenon's actions throughout the screening. During the film, Grenon purchased a soft drink, sipping from the cup using 2 straws. Investigators watched closely as he finished his drink and, at the end of the movie, threw the cup and straws into a trash bin. The moment Grenon and his companion left the theater, police moved in. Officers swiftly retrieved the discarded cup and straws, taking care to ensure no one else had touched them in the meantime.
Yeah, this part fascinates me.
Right?
Always sort of like the disused cup.
The cop just sitting there not paying attention to the movie and watching this guy drinking.
You know, it shows how far we've come from old school reliance just on confessions or witnesses, right? Mm-hmm. The real interview here is between the DNA and the data. in a weird way, right? You know, and the theater of a garbage can. I always see this in movies or cop shows, right?
Because it's real. Yeah, this is what really happens.
Would you like a Coke while we're interviewing you? Right?
Yes.
No, I'm fine, right?
And then they're like, what's he going to do with it? Is he going to wipe it off?
Yeah, puts it in his pocket. No!
Yep, we've seen it many times.
Yeah.
The cup and straws were immediately sent to the forensic laboratory for analysis. The results were conclusive. The DNA extracted from the straws was a perfect match to the male DNA found at the crime scene. This match provided the crucial breakthrough investigators had been seeking for over 22 years. With this evidence in hand, police obtained a warrant for direct DNA sample from Grenon following his arrest, which once again confirmed the match. The operation's success was a testament to the investigative team's meticulous planning and patience, as well as the power of modern forensic science. As the court noted, the DNA evidence was, quote, clear, direct, and left no room for doubt, end quote. This carefully executed surveillance and collection operation finally provided the proof needed to bring closure to one of Quebec's most haunting cold cases. And you have problems with the word closure.
Well, it's kind of a loaded word, isn't it? I think what actually happened here is more precise. The evidence reached the legal threshold for certainty. Mm-hmm. That's not the same thing as an emotional closure, right? It's the foundation that you need to have before anything else can begin. Mm-hmm. Because without that sort of foundation of justice, you just get into a grief loop. Right. Yeah. I was watching a program the other day where somebody an uncle murdered his niece and he's in jail in the UK and has never said where the body is. And the mother was talking about how she's in a grief loop because of that.
On the morning of October 12, 2022, more than 22 years after the brutal murder of Guylaine Potvin, the quiet city of Granby, Quebec, became the stage for a dramatic and long-awaited arrest. Marc-André Grenon, then 47 years old, was apprehended by investigators from the province of Quebec's Cold Case Squad. The arrest was the culmination of decades of heartbreak, relentless detective work, and ultimately the game-changing advances in forensic science that had finally cracked open Guylaine's unsolved homicide.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that this isn't just about progress, it's about integration. You can have the best science in the world, but if investigators aren't trained to understand it, or if departments aren't resourced to pursue it, it doesn't matter.
Right.
This case worked because someone bridged those silos.
Yep. The arrest was carried out swiftly and without incident, but the weight of the moment was not lost on those involved. For more than 8,200 days, Marc-André Grenon had lived as a free man, while Gilain Potvin's family and the Jonquière community endured decades of uncertainty and grief. The news of the arrest sent shockwaves through the province of Quebec. For Guylain's family, it was a bittersweet moment, a surge of hope and relief tempered by the pain of memories long suppressed. Quote, "We always hoped that this day would come," one family member told reporters, echoing the sentiment of a community that had never forgotten Guylaine. Provincial police announced the arrest publicly, stating that Grenon was being charged with first-degree murder and aggravated assault in connection with Gilain Potvin's death. They also revealed that he would face charges of attempted murder and sexual assault for a previously mentioned similar case from July 2000, where a young woman in Sainte-Foy had survived a violent attack. The arrest marked a turning point not only for the Potvin family, but for cold case investigations across Quebec. Prosecutor Pierre-Alexandre Bernard described the decision to charge Grenon as, quote, synonymous with hope for the families of victims who are still searching for answers. The case demonstrated how advances in forensic biology combined with dogged investigative work could breathe new life into even the most challenging files. As court documents later revealed, 4 separate judicial warrants had been authorized during the investigation, including one specifically for the collection of Grenon's DNA. Guylaine's former classmate, Miriam Blaise, recalled barricading herself in her apartment out of fear in the days that followed Guylaine's murder. Quote, "When I heard the news of the arrest years later, I was relieved," Blaise said. "My biggest fear was that the person died and would have taken that secret to their grave," end quote. Bruno Cormier, a retired police officer who worked on the original investigation, kept a photo of Guylaine in his wallet for years, a symbol of the case's enduring emotional weight. Quote, "I know those people were greatly affected," he said of her family.
Yeah, and that fear of permanent unknowability is what defines so many unsolved crimes.
Yeah. Right?
This isn't just about punishment, it's a narrative. We need to know what happened to someone in order to integrate the loss, I want to say. Do you know what I mean? You have to know the facts. Otherwise, the loss is suspended and is ungrievable.
That was how I felt until I found my birth family.
Yeah, it's suspended and ungrievable or whatever, right?
All that was there was this fantasy.
Yeah.
I had to make things up to fill the gaps.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful now that I know the fact.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're totally right. After more than 2 decades of uncertainty, the arrest of Marc-André Grenon in October 2022 marked the beginning of a dramatic and emotionally charged legal process that would grip Quebec and the wider Canadian public. Following his arrest in Granby, Grenon was swiftly brought before the court by video link on October 13, 2022, to face the charges that had haunted him for over 22 years. The charges, first-degree murder and aggravated assault, were read out loud, and Grenon pleaded not guilty to each. The case was assigned to the Chicoutimi Courthouse under the stewardship of Quebec Superior Court Justice François Hewitt, a judge with a formidable reputation for both legal rigor and emotional candor. The trial preparations reflected the gravity and complexity of the case. Jury selection alone was a monumental task as more than 300 prospective jurors were summoned, a testament to the high-profile nature of the crime and the community's enduring interest in the outcome. Each juror was carefully vetted not only for impartiality but for their ability to withstand the emotional weight of the evidence they would be asked to consider. The trial was expected to last 5 weeks, but the emotional toll would linger far longer.
Preparing for a trial like this, Mike, has to be almost about as much about psychology than it is about law.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're asking jurors to sit with emotionally destabilizing material for weeks,
Right.
but then evaluate it with detachment.
Right.
Right? And it's a system built on the hope that humans can actually both be empathetic and analytical at the same time.
So that's the jury's point of view. And then you have witnesses, you have the families having to listen to all of it, even the judge.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of don't care about the accused because who cares if that person feels crappy?
Unless they're actually innocent.
Right.
Right.
So if it's determined that they're innocent, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah.
But in this case, we know that it's not. The media, which had followed the Potvin case for years, descended on Chicoutimi. News outlets across Quebec and Canada reported on every development from the scientific breakthroughs that led to Grenon's arrest to the courtroom drama that would play out in 2024. The public was riveted, not just by the brutality of the original crime, but the remarkable story of its eventual unraveling. Crown prosecutor Alexandra Bernard opened the trial with a detailed narrative that painted a complex picture of forensic science, police work, and the human cost of violence. He explained to the jury how for years the case had stalled. Quote, while male DNA was discovered at the crime scene, there was no match in the police database and no witness to the crime. End quote. Bernard explained that it was only with the advent of the Patron Y-Me project, a pioneering tool that used Y chromosome analysis to suggest possible surnames, that gave investigators what they needed to refocus on Grenon. Forensic biologist Carolyn Paquette, called as an expert witness, presented the DNA evidence in clear, unequivocal terms. Reading aloud from her report, she told the court it was, quote, hundreds of billions of times more probable that male DNA taken from under the nails of Guylaine's right hand come from Marc-André Grenon rather than from someone else, end quote. This was not just a statistical match, it was, in the eyes of science, a near certainty.
Yeah, so probability language in court is always tricky.
Yep.
Right? Numbers that sound definitive to scientists can sound vague to jurors.
Yes.
But this is a case where the magnitude of the odds, when you start talking billions to one, right, it becomes its own kind of plain language.
Yeah. It's like quadrillions to one kind of thing.
It's not absolute, but it's overwhelming.
It's
right?
so overwhelming you can't ignore it. Yeah. The Crown also called pathologist Dr. Carolyn Tanguay, who described in harrowing detail the injuries Guylaine Potvin had suffered. Strangulation, blunt trauma to her head and shoulder, a bite mark on her left breast, and injuries to her genital area, evidence of a violent and deeply personal attack. The testimony was graphic and brutal to hear, but it was essential in establishing the brutality and intent behind the crime. Grenon's defense team, faced with overwhelming scientific evidence, sought to challenge the admissibility and interpretation of the forensic testimony. A significant portion of the trial was devoted to a voir dire, a hearing within the trial, on whether the testimony of Valérie Clermont-Baudouin, the forensic biologist who validated the Patron Y-Me project, should be admitted as expert evidence. The court meticulously reviewed the scientific basis for the Patron Y-Me technique, its reliability, and its limitations. Justice Hewitt ultimately ruled the evidence admissible, noting that, quote, the opinion of Ms. Clermont-Baudouin is admissible to provide the court with scientific information which, in all likelihood, exceeds the experience and knowledge of a jury, end quote. The voir dire also addressed the broader question of how much weight the court should give to new forensic techniques. Justice Hewitt emphasized that while Patron Y-Me was not in itself proof of identification, it was a valid investigative tool that had led police to Grenon and, crucially, to the DNA evidence that proved decisive. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on Guylaine Potvin's family and friends became increasingly evident. The courtroom was often filled with tears as loved ones listened to the details of Guylaine's final moments and the years of uncertainty that followed. For many, the arrest and trial brought a measure of relief, but it also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The pain of loss, the fear that justice might never be done, and the anger at Grenon's years of freedom were palpable in every session.
See, I love back in the UK when you have the robes and the wigs and one of the least acknowledged aspects of trials is that they're also a ritual. They aren't just about fact-finding, they're about sort of a collective witnessing.
Yes. For
the family, sitting in court isn't passive, it's participation and accounting. And then you have like people in their robes and their wigs because it's supposed to represent justice, right? So it's fascinating.
On February 20th, 2024, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Marc-André Grenon guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. Justice Hewitt sentenced him to life in prison, describing him as, quote, a morally and sexually depraved killer, end quote. The verdict was greeted with a mixture of relief and sorrow by Guylaine's family and the wider community. For the first time in more than 2 decades, they could begin to mourn with the knowledge that justice had been served.
Yeah, there's something powerful in how long these people held on. In a way, that long grief becomes, I'd imagine, in a smaller place, it becomes sort of the fabric of the place in some ways, right?
Yeah.
This resolution isn't just legal, it rewrites how the community understands itself in a lot of ways.
Justice Hewitt, known for his directness, did not shy away from addressing these emotions. At sentencing, he delivered a scathing rebuke to Grenon. Quote, you have spent 22 years of your life living free and waking up every morning as if nothing had happened. How were you able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning while Guylaine lay 6 feet underground because of your moral, your sexual depravity, and your killer instinct? He continued. Quote, I feel only disgust and contempt for your actions on April 28, 2000. You are completely devoid of morality. You are sexually depraved, a murderer. You make me sick. End quote. These words, though criticized by some for their emotional intensity, were widely seen as an expression of the community's outrage and the judge's response to the horrors revealed in court. Yeah,
and I think, it's a legitimate debate. How much emotion is too much in judicial speech? But in my view, when a crime is this brutal and its resolution is delayed, language like that acknowledges the weight and makes it clarifying, not indulgent, in my mind. Yeah. And courts don't just interpret the law, they translate grief in a way. I don't know, that's... You know what I'm saying?
They're not letting this guy off the hook by couching the language used.
Yeah.
Grenon's trial also sparked broader discussions about the role of forensic science in the justice system, the ethics of judicial expression, and the enduring impact of violent crime on victims' families. The Canadian Judicial Council later reviewed Justice Hewitt's comments, ultimately deciding not to sanction him, acknowledging that, quote, emotions can run high in the courtroom and that judges must retain some degree of freedom to express themselves without being held to an impossible standard of weighing every word, end quote. The council noted Hewitt's sincere apology and his intent to provide comfort to the victim's family, even if his words were, in hindsight, more forceful than appropriate. The Gilain Potvin case stands as a testament to the power of perseverance, the evolution of forensic science, and the resilience of those left behind in the wake of tragedy. The trial of Marc-André Grenon was not just the resolution of a cold case, it was a reckoning with the past and a reaffirmation of the community's commitment to justice. The use of the Patron project in this case set a new precedent for how genetic genealogy can aid investigations, offering hope to families of other unsolved crimes. For Guylaine's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure but not healing. The scars of loss remain, as does the memory of a young woman whose life was stolen far too soon. In the end, the trial of Marc-André Grenon was more than a legal proceeding, it was a communal act of remembrance, a confrontation with evil, and finally a declaration that even after decades of silence, the truth can prevail. Since the arrest and conviction of Marc-André Grenon, the use of the Patron Why Me technique has gradually expanded within Canadian law enforcement, particularly in Quebec. Following the Grenon case, there has been increased interest in applying Patron Why Me to other cold cases. In fact, the technique played a significant role in another high-profile investigation, the identification of Franklin Maywood Romain as the likely perpetrator in the 1975 rape and murder of Sharon Pryor in Longueuil, Quebec. The case we covered in episode 130 and updated in episode 271. Although Romain was already deceased by the time he was identified, the case demonstrated the potential of Patron Why Me to help resolve long-standing mysteries. Despite these successes, the technique remains relatively new and is being adopted cautiously. Experts and law enforcement officials acknowledge that while Patron Why Me can narrow down suspects by linking DNA to a family name, it doesn't directly identify individuals. Most of the cases solved so far using this method have involved suspects who were no longer alive, limiting its immediate impact on making new arrests. Nevertheless, the conviction of Marc-André Grenon has set an important precedent. It has encouraged police to consider Patron Why Me and other advanced DNA techniques for unsolved cases, and there is optimism that more breakthroughs will follow as the method becomes more widely accepted and the supporting genealogical databases continue to grow. For now, Patron Why Me stands as a promising tool in the ongoing effort to bring resolution to cold cases, even as its full potential is still being explored. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 369, Final Justice, the murder of Guylaine Potvin.
That's right, it's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
Here's our first and only voicemail for this episode.
Matthew, Mike, you guys are continuing to kick ass and chew gum, and I don't hear any bubbles popping. Keep up the good work. This is Freddie and Terry, Central Alberta this time. Matthew, I got a new one for you. What kind of dog is Freddie, and who's he named after? All right, boys. Go squat in a pot. Have a good day.
Thank you, Terry. So Terry is the human, and Freddie is the dog. So who's the dog Freddie named after, Matthew? I have ideas.
Freddy Krueger.
Okay. Interesting. Why? What kind of breed is Freddy Krueger then, Matthew?
I can picture it in my head,
mm-hmm.
but I can't remember the breed's name. A Chesapeake Bay Retriever.
A Chesapeake Bay Retriever. And why so?
Why is because his parents were Chesapeake Bay Retrievers.
Oh, I thought it was going to be something clever.
No.
Oh, boy.
Chesapeake Bay Retrievers are great dogs. Either that or he's named after Freddie Mercury.
Well, this is what I thought.
And if he is, I think he's a Chihuahua.
Really? Well, I think Freddie Mercury would be a Great Dane.
Okay.
Because Great Danes they command attention, the spotlight. They're big.
Right.
You know, Freddie Mercury was not a big person, but a big personality. And they're also known for gentle and friendly nature beneath their giant, you know.
But I also think Central Alberta dog, I think it's sort of if I lived in Central Alberta.
And you had a dog named Freddie, it would be rough and tumble.
And had some space, right, for running. Like, I think it's a dog that can belt out into those fields and run, right?
There you go. There you go. Well, that makes sense.
Send us a picture of Freddie.
Yeah, we're curious about Freddie. Send it to darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to have a conversation in a future episode about what kind of dog Freddie is, because we just need to know. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. Alrighty. Well, it is time for us to do some Patreon and Donut Money donors. We don't have any new patrons, but Matthew, we do have a new Donut Money donor.
Okay. Let's go.
That person is Curtis 4, F-O-R-E, Curtis 4. And Curtis says, show suggestion. The person killed in this article was a family friend, and I had spent time with him and his kids when I was younger and felt comfortable researching into it myself. So Curtis didn't include a link. So email us the link, Curtis, because now you've got my curiosity piqued. darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. I am super curious about what case that you're referring to, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
So I think.
So what do you?
I think he's a master carpenter and restoration expert.
A restoration expert, and where does he live?
Yeah, so he's a carpenter. I think he's also in Alberta.
Hey,
yeah,
Alberta.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I'm going to say Southern Alberta.
Southern Alberta, one of the beautiful parts of the Canadian prairies. Love me some Alberta. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.